Welcome to Sunday Journal, everyone. I'm Todd Ross. She was called the Black Grandma Moses. Clementine Hunter is who we're talking about this Sunday morning, one of the premier folk artists of our generation. And this month is the 50th anniversary of her paintings at Melrose Plantation. As you take a look at her there on the right-hand side of that picture, there she is in front of one of her murals. Clementine Hunter did not begin painting until she was 57 years old. Yet remarkably, she emerged as one of the country's leading folk artists. Hunter is often compared to Grandma Moses, who produced approximately 2,000 paintings between her 70s and her death at the age of 101. Often labeled the Black Grandma Moses, Hunter lived to be 101 and created more than 5,000 paintings. She lived in the small North Louisiana town of Clocheville. She stayed in this area for her entire life, and the farthest she ever traveled was to Baton Rouge. At the age of 15, she moved to Melrose Plantation, where she lived for the rest of her life. She started working as a field hand and was later promoted to tending the garden, doing the laundry, and cooking at the big house. Our guest this morning is Thomas Whitehead. Mr. Whitehead was a close friend of Clementine Hunter's during the last 20 years of her life. He taught at Northwestern State University, received his master's from Boston University, and has an extensive collection of Hunter's art that has traveled across the country. He is also one of the editors of this latest book, right here, Clementine Hunter, The African House Murals. And he joins us now with more on Clementine Hunter, as well as more on Melrose Plantation. Mr. Whitehead, thanks so much for joining us, and good morning to you.
Thank you, Todd.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Melrose Plantation first before we begin to look at some of Clementine's art, and we will coming up. But first of all, this is where she lived for the majority of her life. Where is Melrose Plantation?
Melrose Plantation is in the southern end of Natchitoches Parish, about 5 miles from Clocheville and about 10 miles below Natchitoches. Melrose is one of the most unusual plantations in the American South because it was founded by black people or the descendants of black people, which you never think about that. A black woman, Marie Therese Quanquan, was a freed slave in Natchitoches, and she had obviously a liaison with a man, a Frenchman named Claude Thomas Pierre Metoyer. That relationship produced about 10 kids or more, and those kids became the Creole community of North Louisiana, which is now almost a nationwide phenomenon. And those Creole descendants of Marie Therese Quanquan built Melrose Plantation, then called Yucca, in the early 1800s.
We are looking at this book right now, Clementine Hunter, The African House Murals, and you are one of the editors. At Melrose Plantation, she painted, or the paintings are available at the African House.
Right.
And what makes the African House unique?
First of all, the structure itself is a rare example of African-American architecture in the United States. The American Institute of Architects has recognized it as one of the outstanding examples of that type of architecture.
We're taking a look at it right now.
It was built around 1803 in that general time period, sometime in the early 1800s. We don't know the exact year.
Now, this house, it almost looks like a hut.
It was often called the Mushroom House initially, and then it was changed the name to African House. The upstairs was used as a storehouse, a provision place. There were no steps to it, and eventually they added steps, but it was made to put boards on the ground and roll provisions or slide things upstairs so it couldn't be stolen. It was very hard to steal when you couldn't get to it. The downstairs, we're not real sure. There are some bars in the windows indicating that it may have been used as a slave jail, but we don't know that. But it's all brick. It was all slave-made brick. And it is truly an unusual example of architecture.
Now, this is where Clementine's art is currently hanging, at least some of the art from Melrose.
Right, the murals. In 1955, the idea came to be that she would paint scenes of Southern life, plantation life, around the second floor of African House. There were steps by then. And there were 9 panels cut to fit, and then she painted on these 9 panels scenes of plantation life in Louisiana in the mid-1950s.
We're going to take a look at some of that art coming up in just a few minutes, but in the meantime, I wanted to ask you, who was Clementine Hunter? I mean, we saw some pictures of her earlier, and what kind of woman was this, and what was her background?
She is truly one of the most remarkable people I ever met. She had no formal education. She was ran away from school when she was 6 years old, would not go back to school. And she worked in the fields, and then she worked in the kitchen and the house, ironing and cooking. But yet she was brilliant, and obviously these paintings reflect a talent, a deep inside talent that, was discovered. Her brilliance is enormous, but it was all uneducated brilliance.
And she lived at Melrose for the most part of her life. She moved there when she was like 15.
Right. She moved with her father and mother when she was 15, and she stayed there the rest of her life.
Why did she, I mean, did she ever have any desire to leave Melrose?
Oh, no, absolutely not. She had invitations to go all over the world with her paintings. Jimmy Carter invited her to the White House through Senator Johnston, and Clementine's comment was very simple. If he wants to see me, he can come here. I'm not going there.
Well, back to Melrose, though. There have been other characters, so to speak, that have been at Melrose Plantation over the years, right?
Oh, certainly. One of the most famous writers in 20th century Louisiana was Lyle Saxon, and he lived in New Orleans, but he did all of his writing at Melrose.
Why there?
He liked the country atmosphere. Melrose became very unique because besides this African house, there was another structure originally built by the descendants of Marie Therese. Then there was a big plantation house built, and then other little houses were moved there. So it was like an artist and writers colony in the first half of the 20th century.
So a lot of artists and writers would
Yes.
go to Melrose and write their stuff. I mean,
Paint, write, take pictures. Alberta Kinsey was a very prominent New Orleans artist in the 1930s and 40s. She worked at Melrose. It was like a vacation. You could ride the train from New Orleans and get off only a mile from Melrose, and they would go this great life at Melrose of an artist colony.
Yeah. Now, this month is the 50th anniversary. In other words, 50 years ago this month, Clementine Hunter did these murals at the African House.
She started, the idea came about from Francois Mignon, the man that lived there, in end of May of 1955. They got the idea in early June. They got the boards, got them cut. She finished the murals by July 21st.
So, wait, let's go back to that timeline.
Okay.
How quickly did she do these
From
murals?
around the 1st of June to July the 21st, approximately a month and a half, she painted these murals.
A month and a half to
Yes.
do these murals.
There are 9 murals.
And how often did she work on them?
Oh, she worked all day.
All day?
Yes. When she did them, she had a little house across the road, and when they finished a mural, they would literally pack it across the cotton field, and then they would install it to make sure it fit, and then she'd go back and work on the next one.
Wow. Well, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to take a closer look at her art, and we'll also talk a little bit more about what made her such a famous artist, an artist today that many people in art schools across the country continue to study from right here in Louisiana. Again, it's the 50th anniversary this month of the infamous, or I should say famous paintings at the Melrose Plantation. There you see Clementine Hunter on your right-hand side of the picture. There you see her there in that striking red dress. A wonderful woman. We'll talk more about her life and more about her art coming up. Stay with us, everyone. Welcome back to Sunday Journal, everyone. I'm Todd Ross. Our focus this morning is Clementine Hunter and her fantastic mural. It is the 50th anniversary of her mural at Melrose Plantation, and our guest this morning is Tom Whitehead. He is the editor of this new book, Clementine Hunter, The African House Murals, along with Art Shiver. And Tom, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you, Todd.
Well, without further ado, we've been talking about this fantastic art. Let's take a look at some of her photos. I think we have 9 of them, 9 photos of some of the murals. And this is just a kind of a wide view of what we were talking about earlier. This is the upstairs
Right, and you see the
of the
steps,
African House.
The white banisters where the stairs
Right.
go down.
Now, this is all original.
Oh yes, everyone. These are the murals. You see here parts of 4 murals, and then there are 5 on the other side of the room. This is the upstairs area of the African House.
Now, and this is a closer view here of one of the paintings.
Right.
And as we take a look at this painting, and we'll slowly progress through some of these paintings, I'd like to point out, I guess, this is folk art. I mean, this is primitive art, I guess. That's the definition of folk art.
Probably a better term is naive art, because self-taught. She had no formal training at all, and she figured out how to do these things. And sometimes they're interesting how she, for example, in that painting here, the people picking the cotton, she shows depth by stacking them on top of each other. So that's a self-taught a way of doing paintings.
We see these individuals picking cotton here.
Right.
This is really her art. What makes it so important, what makes it so socially relevant, I should say, is the insider perspective that she gave to these scenes.
Exactly. The people that worked on this plantation in the South, they had very few ways of documenting this lifestyle. They didn't have cameras. Many could not write or read or paint. Clementine painted from an insider's perspective, you're correct. Here they are working the cotton on the right side, and there's a wedding going on the left side. That's kind of an interesting wedding scene.
That's at the top left of the
Right,
screen
and you'll
there.
notice the bride is in yellow on the left edge of the screen.
Yeah.
Clementine always painted the most important people largest. And notice how large the bride is, and look at the preacher down on the right, not the one in the white serving drinks, but the little man. She thought the least of the preacher, and then the groomsman, the groom was also smaller than the bride. She always made size important.
That's very interesting. And during the course, and now this is I think I've seen this several times. This particular scene right here, she's very famous for this.
That's a funeral. She painted. She was like an opera singer in a way. She had a repertoire. She did the same paintings over and over frequently. There's a hearse, and they had a wagon that pulled the hearse. And there was an old lady out there named Aunt Addie, and Aunt Addie always drove the hearse, and that's Aunt Addie driving the hearse.
Why, some may look at this art and say to themselves, you know, it's not exactly the greatest looking scene. There could be some better lines drawn and whatnot. What makes this, as far as art students out there, why do they continue to study Clementine Hunter's art?
There are probably two reasons. One reason is because her style is completely unique. No one else has ever painted like this. She invented her style of painting.
No one taught her to do
No,
this.
she never saw any other art. You know, we got to thinking, we don't think she's ever seen an art book even. She had limited access to materials like that. And then also, these stories she tells. It's so important, the fact that she's relating experiences that most people haven't had. That's a baptism. And if you notice in the very bottom of the screen there,
what is that?
there's a head in the water. That's the lady being baptized.
Wow.
And that's the church, by the way. That building really exists out at Melrose, St. Augustine's Church, and it's still there today.
And these hills, I mean, it wasn't a very hilly
No,
area of the
that's
state.
the only way she knew how to get all the activity on there was to tilt the hill, the land.
I see.
This is a wash day.
And I also want to mention the fabulous colors kind of in the background here.
Yes.
I mean, that's not something that we've added on the television screen. That is something that she absolutely was cognizant of when she was painting.
That's a very high resolution photograph you're looking at, and it's very accurate colors. You'll notice in the upper right-hand corner, there she is painting. And the lady sitting on the easel to the right, sitting with the easel to the right of the tree.
A self-portrait,
A self-portrait of her painting. And there's one other interesting thing about that scene. They're all women working there, washing and scrubbing the clothes. And there's a man sitting on the front porch of that house. She said he was lazy. He wouldn't do anything. The women had to do all the work.
How many people across the country do you think have studied? I mean, how far has her art traveled?
All over the world. I know there's a museum in Bath, England, that has a collection of her works. And there are right now, at this moment, 15 in New York at the American Folk Art Museum.
Before we switch photos, I wanted to, what's this guy hanging out of a tree?
The guy is shaking a pecan tree. Melrose is, besides growing cotton, the other big crop at Melrose would be pecans. And there's a man out there shaking the tree, and they're picking up pecans.
Is that a fish in the bottom right-hand corner?
That's a fish in the river, but there's also hogs. Look at the hogs on the left side. She liked hogs, so she loved pork. So her pigs are really big. And the scene above it is the honky-tonk, Saturday night at the honky-tonk. And there's dancing and music and fighting going on. That building, by the way, really existed out at Melrose.
Really?
It was Bubba's Bar.
This is kind of a wider shot. I guess that's the African house, I'm assuming, in the middle there?
Sure, that was a second structure built at Melrose, and the house on the right is the big house, they call it, at Melrose today. And that's the rare example of a Southern plantation home built by non-whites. They were built by Creoles.
These are pictures, again, if you're just joining us, of Clementine Hunter and the murals that are hanging at the African house at Melrose Plantation. This is the 50th anniversary of her paintings there, and this is another wonderful shot here. And what is that object with
That's
the
a
ball
sundial.
on top?
That's a sundial that was
Okay.
behind. It was the house on the left is the original structure at Melrose, the
Okay.
Yucca house.
Right.
The sundial was actually right behind it, but she couldn't quite figure out how to show that, so she pulled it to the right. Let me give you another quick example here.
Sure.
You see the man with the buggy and the horse right in the center of the painting up? That is Uncle Israel. He was the last of the slaves that was alive at Melrose. And he was alive until the 1930s, and he had a horse and a buggy he rode around in.
So she felt like it was important to
Important,
put him
yes.
in that mural.
And you can barely see it on the left side of the screen, but there's an airplane in the upper
Yeah,
left corner.
yeah.
And that's an interesting contrast from the last slave at Melrose to representing the 20th century, the airplane, in the same picture.
Right.
That was all a part of her experiences at Melrose.
Wow. And again, these are the murals that are hanging at Melrose Plantation in the African house. It was 50 years ago this month that Clementine Hunter painted those murals. It's also important, Thomas, to point out that she didn't just paint these murals. I mean, thousands of other paintings.
She painted paintings. She also did some quilts. She did some handiwork with quilts. She also painted objects, bottles and things like that. She was a very multimedia artist and talented.
At what time, and what year, and how did this start to transform into, who was the first to say, you know, we're onto something here. This woman is really, really special, and she needs more attention than what she's probably getting here in Natchitoches.
You have a very good point. We have records that she was painting as early as 1939, but we don't. She with no publicity. In 1943 and 4, two gentlemen at Melrose, James Register and Francois Mignon, became fascinated with the idea that there was something here. So in 43 and 44, they started promoting her work. So for years, we don't know how long when she really started, but we know she had been painting 5 or 6 years before anyone got the idea that this was something that needed to be told about.
And then it slowly progressed from there.
Yes.
And when did she pass away?
January the 1st, 1988.
So up until 1988, she had to have known that she was somewhat of a celebrity. I mean, the press showed up when she was turning, I guess, 100.
Yes.
There were press corps all over
the place
when she was there. She had to have known that she was somewhat famous, if you will. What did she think of her work and the importance of her work?
She always thought that the publicity was sort of a nuisance because she could be painting the time she spent talking to people. So she didn't think too much of it. I have a quick short story. I was driving up to her house one afternoon, and she was out on the side of the road talking to a car. The car window was rolled down, sticking her head in. And as I drove up, the car pulled away. I said, Clementine, who are those people? She said, I don't know who they were, but they wanted to know where Clementine Hunter lived, and I told them just up the road a piece. So she didn't want to be disturbed.
Absolutely. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to have more on the details of her art and what made her such a fascinating artist, where she got her paints and things of that nature when we come back. Welcome back to Sunday Journal, everyone. I'm Todd Ross. This month it is the 50th anniversary of Clementine Hunter and her murals at the African House at Melrose Plantation. And we've been talking more about Clementine Hunter and her fantastic art. And joining us now is Thomas Whitehead. He's been our guest this morning. And he was a very, very dear friend of Clementine Hunter's. In fact, I believe in your bio that she called you her white son.
She called me her white son.
You visited her once a week for how long?
From 1969, when I went back to Natchitoches to go to work at Northwestern, I went out there once a week, usually on Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon, and took her supplies for 20 years.
Now, took her supplies. You mean to tell me that she didn't buy her own supplies?
She never went to the art supply store and said, I want this, that, and the other. She would tell us, I need white paint. She always needed white paint because she used so much of it for the cotton. Boards, brushes, whatever.
What did she paint on? When we saw the murals, those were painted on
plywood.
Plywood. What did she primarily paint on?
Her favorite surface was a board, a flat, smooth board called Upson board or Beaver board. It was a very smooth board. But they quit making it, and it was very difficult to get it, and we finally got her to paint on canvas. She always marked her paintings with a pencil before she painted them. And canvas is not smooth, and it was more difficult to mark a line with canvas. The Beaver board had a smooth surface that made it very easy to mark.
We were talking earlier about whether she really understood her place in history. What do you think she would make of all the talk today, 50 years from when she did? I mean, do you think?
Absolutely, it was just a disruption to her. She cared nothing about publicity. And, you know, fairly over the years, we took some fairly prominent people out there. I can remember taking Joan Rivers. I took the president of CBS News out there and other people. And it was oblivious. She was oblivious to it. She didn't care who they were. It didn't make any difference, which is sort of wonderful.
Well, it only adds to her legendary status, really, when you think about it.
A personal story. Joan Rivers, you know, cracks and jokes. Clementine just ignored the jokes, and that shut Joan Rivers up. I mean, Clementine just looked at her funny and shut her up.
Well, most people ignore her.
Yes, yes.
But this book, this is a fantastic book. Tell me more about it. It's Clementine Hunter, the African House Murals, and we looked at, we were showing some of the photos. And this really is a fantastic book. It goes into more of the fantastic art, right? I mean, it tells her story, too.
Yes. The book's organized around an essay on Clementine Hunter, an essay on Francois Mignon, who was very influential in getting her to do these, on the African House, where you're flipping then. The African House is the building they're housed in. Then, rather remarkably, the man out there, Francois Mignon, kept a journal the entire time he lived at Melrose. And there's a day-by-day accounting of the murals being created. And the documents are in the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill Library. We went there, read the documents, and that's where the narrative, how the paintings came about, is there. It's from that journal. Then there's also 2 essays at the end about the artistic significance of the murals by a writer from the American Folk Art Museum and a gentleman at the National Park Service writing about the cultural significance of the murals.
What is the cultural significance of the murals?
Oh, the fact that they are done from this insider's perspective of how life was really like. That has never been done about, up until the end of World War II, agriculture on the southern plantation was very labor intensive. After World War II, mechanization came. The jobs all went away. So that's what changed, and Clementine's painting that before mechanization came to agriculture.
When did she paint? I mean, did she paint in the daytime, nighttime?
Amazingly, she painted at night. I would think that as you get older, you'd want more light in the daytime. She didn't. She would, when she was working, she worked in Melrose in the daytime and then painted.
What did she do, by the way, at Melrose?
She was, first of all, she worked in the field as a picking cotton, and then she became a washwoman, washing and ironing, and then she became a cook in the kitchen. There's stories that she really wasn't such a good cook, that she didn't wash the pots and everything very well, but that she was really the assistant cook. She'd only cook when no one else was there. But then she retired, when she retired, she would sleep late in the mornings, paint a little in the afternoon, but paint it after dark at night.
Interesting.
Sat around an old pot-bellied stove. She had heat in her house, but she loved an old pot-bellied stove.
Did she ever talk about why she enjoyed painting? I mean, sometimes today the experienced artisans have different reasons why they. I'm curious to know why she enjoyed art.
We all asked that question. It was always, the answer was, it's in my head. I've got to get it out of my head. And she said she could not look at anything and paint it. It had to be in her memory to paint it.
Did she ever draw or paint, I should say, did she ever paint anything other than life on the farm? In other words, did she ever do anything abstract, or did she ever do portraits of anyone?
She did flowers, still lives, lots of flowers. And back in the early 1960s, there was an effort by James Register to steer her into trying some abstracts. And they were sort of interesting. In fact, the great collection of the abstracts are at the southern branch, the Scotlandville branch of the Parish Library. James Register gave them 16 paintings, and they're on display. Several times when I come to Baton Rouge, I stop by there just to look at them. They are fabulous.
But other than that, it was primarily plantation life.
I would say 90%, 95% of everything she ever did was plantation life.
And the reason why she enjoyed doing it is because it was in her head.
Yes,
and she
it had to get out of my head.
It had to get out of her head. Well, the 50th anniversary of the paintings, the murals, I should say, at Melrose Plantation, and everyone is invited to go to Melrose.
Right. There's going to be a big gala on July 23rd. The afternoon, there's a symposium to release this book. It's from 2 to 4 in Natchitoches. It's free. Just come. That night, the gala fundraiser is $50 a person, food, drink, entertainment, and all the proceeds raised they're going to go to conservation work on the buildings at Melrose.
Fantastic. And again, when is that date?
It's July the 23rd, and the Natchitoches Tourist Commission is a source of information.
And the Melrose Plantation is completely free of charge if you'd like to go there and check it out?
There is a tour charge.
There is a tour charge, but the event that you're talking about is
the symposium is free, yes. The symposium's going to be in town in an air-conditioned building.
Fantastic. Thomas, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Well, that is a look at Clementine Hunter and her art. Thanks so much for joining us this Sunday. We'll see you next Sunday at 8 a.m.